Kash Patel stepped into the packed House Judiciary Committee room expecting a routine sparring match, but within exactly 4 minutes, the man who once vowed to expose every dark corner of the Epstein empire began to physically shake under the weight of his own shattered promises. The air in the room was thick.
I think what happened, Mr. Patel, is that suddenly you discovered that Donald Trump's name was all over these files, and you started a giant cover-up. So you are under oath, Mr. Patel.
Gentleman
Mr.
from New
Chairman,
Jersey is
I would like
recognized
to
for
ask
his
if
5
you would
minutes.
meet with the women who were sexually
Time does not belong.
abused and raped and groomed
Time does
at
not
the
belong
ages
to the
of
gentlelady from
14
Washington.
and
The time now
16
belongs.
years old. Are you
time-
going to cover up?
No, I'm
Are
not
you
gonna-
going to continue
I'm gonna
to
recognize
cover
the
up
gentleman
for
from
the
New Jersey
rich
for
and
his 5 minutes.
powerful men, including those that might be on this committee?
I could get-
you
you get
are
30
not
seconds.
answering the question. The question
I have. You just don't like the answer.
Are these women credible? It's a yes or no answer.
I have answered the question.
Well,
and I
what is
keep
the
telling
answer?
you, I'm the only FBI director that has welcomed new information in this
Okay.
case. This
You're
administration is the only one that has welcomed any new information in this
Is there
case.
a yes or no to whether
Present
the
new
victims
credible
are
information. Present new
Are
information.
the victims credible
The victims-
or not?
Electric with the kind of tension that only precedes a massive political collapse. Every major network camera was rolling, their red lights unblinking, capturing a moment that would soon be etched into the annals of congressional history. Representative Pramila Jayapal leaned into her microphone, her voice devoid of theatrics but sharp enough to cut bone. She did not yell, she did not need to. Her strategy was...
You are
30
not
seconds.
answering the question. The question
I
is,
have. You just don't like the answer.
Are these women credible? It's a yes or no answer.
I have answered the question.
Well,
and I
what is
keep
the
telling
answer?
you, I'm the only FBI director that has welcomed new information in this
Okay.
case. This
You're not-
administration is the only one that has welcomed any new information in this
Is there
case.
a yes or no to whether
Present
the
new
victims
credible
are
information. Present new
Are
information.
the victims credible
The victims-
or not?
I'll tell you what happened in the last Trump
Are they
administration.
credible or not? You can't even
Victims
say.
credibly came forward, and you know what happened? President Trump authorized the indictments
President
of Jeffrey
Trump
Epstein.
called
Not
them a
Biden,
hoax.
not Obama.
President Trump
no one
called
else.
the entire thing a Democratic hoax. So I would like to ask
The gentlelady's time has expired. I gave her the additional 45 seconds she requested. The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from
Mr.
New
Chairman,
Jersey is
I would like
recognized
to
for his
ask if
5
you would
minutes.
meet with the women who were sexually
Time does not
abused
belong.
and raped and groomed
Time does
at
not
the
belong
ages
to the
of
gentlelady from
14
Washington.
and
The time now
16 years
belongs.
old. Are
The
you
time-
going to cover up?
No, I'm
Are
not
you
gonna-
going to continue
I'm gonna
to
recognize
cover
the
up
gentleman
for
from
the
New Jersey
rich
for
and
his 5 minutes.
powerful men, including those that might be on this committee?
I can yell
Or
too,
are
Mr.
you
Chairman,
going
but I don't wanna
to
yell
allow
above
them
this.
to
The time
testify?
belongs to the gentleman from New Jersey. I
Are you
appreciate
going
the
to allow
gentlelady
them to
yielding
testify,
back.
Mr. Patel?
Go ahead.
Will you allow them to testify to you,
Mr. Patel.
Far more devastating, she simply placed Patel's own passwords directly in front of him and watched as the fearless truth teller the public had been sold slowly morphed into a cornered protector of the powerful. The exchange began with a brutal accusation. Jayapal looked directly at the FBI director, her gaze unwavering, and stated that the sudden change in his behavior was likely due to one terrifying discovery. Donald Trump's name was plastered all over those hidden files, triggering a massive institutional cover-up, reminding him that he was under oath. The tension escalated as other voices in the room attempted to interject, creating a chaotic symphony of overlapping defenses. Questions flew through the air like daggers. Would he meet with the women who were groomed and exploited at the tender ages of 14 and 16? Was he going to continue covering up for incredibly powerful men, perhaps even individuals sitting within that very committee? The director's posture stiffened, his eyes darting defensively as he accused his interrogators of simply not liking his answers. He insisted with a trembling edge to his voice that he had already answered the questions. He stubbornly claimed to be the only FBI director who had actually welcomed new information in this sprawling case, positioning his administration as the sole beacon of transparency. But the relentless demand for a simple yes or no regarding the presentation of new credible information and whether the victims themselves were credible left him visibly faltering. To understand the sheer magnitude of this confrontation, one must rewind the clock and examine the carefully constructed public persona of Kash Patel. Before he took the helm at the FBI, Patel was a media fixture, a loud and unapologetic critic of the very agency he now leads. He had very strong, very public opinions about what the federal government was intentionally hiding regarding the horrific trafficking ring orchestrated by Jeffrey Epstein. In a widely circulated September 2023 interview with Glenn Beck, Patel confidently declared that the infamous Black Book was under the direct control of the FBI director. He demanded that the names of the abusers be exposed to the light of day. By December of that same year, his rhetoric had only intensified. Even shortly after securing his position as FBI director in February of 2025, he took to social media to broadcast a resolute promise. He tweeted that there would be no cover-ups, no missing documents, and absolutely no stone left unturned. He was positioning himself as the ultimate anti-establishment warrior, the man who would finally drain the darkest swamps of Washington. In a high-profile June appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast, Patel doubled down on this narrative, promising the American public that his team had reviewed the information and was prepared to release every single thing they legally could. He mocked the idea that the Black Book didn't exist or that the Senate Intelligence Committee was justified in withholding it. Speaking as a former federal public defender and prosecutor, Patel explained the fundamental basics of an investigation. He argued that the very first thing law enforcement does when targeting an individual is subpoena every single document they own. To him, the idea that the FBI did not possess the book or the client list was an absurd conspiracy in itself. He boldly told the establishment to put their big boy pants on, insisting that the American people should not have to wait for another election cycle to witness the accountability and the exposure of deep-rooted corruption they so rightfully deserved. Back then, Patel loudly proclaimed that the FBI was in on the cover-up. Then came July 2025, and the narrative abruptly, shockingly fractured. Overnight, the promised wave of radical transparency evaporated. After his agency reviewed more than 300 gigabytes of explosive data and physical evidence, Patel, alongside Attorney General Pam Bondi, released a brief, highly sanitized video and a memo. The message to the American public was a chilling reversal. There was nothing more to see. The official stance was now that no further disclosure would be appropriate or warranted. 300 gigabytes is not a trivial amount of data. It does not consist of a few stray folders or redacted emails. That staggering number represents absolute vaults of victim statements, detailed calendars, encrypted communications, and unredacted flight logs that possess the power to finally map out and expose the full, horrifying scope of the international network. Yet Patel, the man who had built his entire brand on relentless exposure, unilaterally decided that the American people no longer needed to see the truth. The timing of this sudden, inexplicable U-turn is what makes it so utterly devastating. This bureaucratic pivot did not happen in a vacuum. It occurred immediately following explosive reports that Donald Trump's name appeared repeatedly throughout those exact same newly reviewed files. This was not a display of careful bureaucratic caution or legal prudence. To those watching in the hearing room and the millions watching at home, it looked like a breathtaking betrayal of every single promise Patel had ever made. The man who once stood on a soapbox demanding total transparency had seamlessly transformed into the ultimate gatekeeper, willing to bury the truth the exact moment it threatened the most powerful political figure in the country. He was no longer draining the swamp, he was standing guard at its edge, weaponizing his agency to protect it. When the director of the FBI personally controls such vital files and chooses to lock them in the dark after discovering the name of a former president inside, the institution itself becomes fatally compromised. Public trust does not just slowly erode in these moments. It violently collapses. And the survivors, the brave women who had waited agonizing years for a fleeting glimpse of justice, were left watching the very man who swore on national television to deliver it become the final impenetrable wall standing between them and the truth. What exactly was buried in those 300 gigabytes that was deemed so explosive it was worth shattering every public vow? That question hangs in the air, representing perhaps the most dangerous and heavily guarded secret in Washington today. As the hearing pushed forward, Jayapal methodically tightened the net. She confronted Patel with the reporting from the Wall Street Journal, which stated that in May, Attorney General Bondi specifically informed Trump that he was featured in the Epstein files. Crucially, during that very same meeting, it was reportedly decided that the Department of Justice had no plans to release the documents to the public. Jayapal highlighted the glaring contradictions in Patel's recent testimonies. She reminded the room that just the day prior, he had testified to Senator Kennedy that there was supposedly no credible information proving Epstein trafficked individuals to anyone else. He had claimed that he was continuously and publicly begging people to come forward with more information so the Bureau could look into it. Yet, in response to another representative's questioning earlier that same day, Patel appeared to heavily imply that the survivors themselves were not credible. When Jayapal cornered him on this, Patel immediately grew defensive, insisting that was not what he had said. But Jayapal was entirely unbothered by his deflections. She brilliantly pivoted the focus away from the bureaucratic doublespeak and placed it squarely on the human toll of the cover-up. She brought the survivors into the room conceptually and emotionally. She spoke of the women who had traveled to Capitol Hill, individuals who had submitted harrowing testimonies of being groomed and exploited when they were merely 14 and 16 years old. These women had practically begged to meet with the president. They had formally requested to sit down with the FBI director. They pleaded for the deep structural investigations they had been promised by politicians on the campaign trail. Some of these women had never publicly testified before, making their decision to step into the glaring light of Capitol Hill an act of immense, agonizing courage. Jayapal weaponized Patel's own logic against him. If he was truly so desperate for the public to submit new information, why had he categorically refused to look these survivors in the eye? She offered him one final chance to answer a simple binary question. Yes or no? Had he met with the women who endured this unspeakable abuse? Instead of offering a shred of empathy or a direct answer, Patel exploded into a defensive tirade. He claimed his fundamental job as the FBI director was to inform, completely sidestepping the yes or no question. He angrily accused his interrogators of insinuating that he was not actively hunting child predators and traffickers, demanding they look at his statistical arrest records. He scoffed at the accusations of a cover-up, pointing an accusing finger firmly at the past. He loudly demanded to know where everyone was during the Obama and Biden administrations when, according to him, the real cover-ups were occurring. He asked why anyone in those previous administrations hadn't spoken to these purported witnesses, demanding a single person to provide credible information. But this deflection was a catastrophic miscalculation. The women who were exploited as teenagers did not just send anonymous letters into the void. They physically came to the halls of Congress. They asked to meet the people in charge. They asked for the justice that was printed on the brochures of the American legal system. The response they received from the current director of the FBI was to question the motives of the lawmakers asking on their behalf, and to point fingers at the supposed failures of previous presidential administrations. That is not an answer. That is a total abdication of duty. The current FBI director possesses the unilateral authority, the vast resources, and the specific mandate he once campaigned heavily on to finally deliver closure to these survivors. Instead, he treated their heartbreaking request for a simple meeting as a hostile political insinuation to be aggressively batted away. He promised a massive wave of transparency, claiming his agency would continue to put out the documents that past leaders had maliciously withheld from the American public. But the brutal, inescapable truth in that hearing room was that while past administrations may have indeed failed these women, Kash Patel specifically ran on a platform promising to fix exactly that failure. He is not a political pundit anymore. He is not a bystander. He is the sitting director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, possessing full, unmitigated authority and complete, unrestricted access to the deepest vaults of the files. The detail regarding Attorney General Pam Bondi makes his hostile silence even heavier. The revelation that Bondi reportedly discussed the files directly with the former president, confirming his name was in them while simultaneously assuring him the Department of Justice would keep them locked away, is staggering. While it may not automatically satisfy the legal threshold to prove a criminal cover-up in a court of law, it unequivocally demonstrates that the decision to lock down the evidence was not made by low-level distant analysts crunching risk assessments. The fate of those 300 gigabytes was discussed in the very rooms where the president's name and political future were on the table. The survivors, now adults who have spent their entire lives waiting for the scales of justice to balance, are left to expose exactly who the system really serves. When Jayapal pushed harder, refusing to let go of the credibility question, Patel's carefully crafted mask slipped completely. The words that tumbled out of his mouth next left the crowded room in a state of stunned, breathless silence. The political theater briefly stopped, and the raw, ugly mechanics of institutional protection were laid bare. Patel argued aggressively with the committee chairman about his allotted time, perfectly illustrating his desire to fight over procedural rules rather than answer for the victims. Jayapal cut through the noise, asking once again, with piercing clarity, "Are the victims of this horrific trafficking ring credible? Are the people with first-hand information about ongoing illicit operations credible?" Patel, shifting uncomfortably, claimed he was only commenting on the evidence they possessed. He repeated his exhausted talking point that they routinely ask for people to come forward, and then he delivered the fatal blow to his own anti-establishment legacy. He stated that the evidence they currently had was the exact same evidence that the Biden and Obama Justice Departments possessed. And it was those administrations, he argued, frantically, not him, who had previously determined that the information from these women was not credible. The hypocrisy echoed off the walls. When pressed again and again for one simple human answer, "Are these survivors credible?" Kash Patel absolutely refused to give it. He offered no yes, he offered no. Instead, the man who built an empire criticizing the corruption of the establishment retreated like a coward behind the very conclusions of the Obama and Biden Justice Departments he had spent years demonizing. He claimed the evidence was identical, and because his political rivals had previously decided the women were not credible, he was apparently bound by their historic judgment. But as the current director of the FBI, Patel does not get to conveniently inherit old, flawed conclusions and package them as his sworn duty. He controls the files now. He explicitly stated that his team reviewed hundreds of gigabytes of additional unseen material. If absolutely nothing new emerged from that massive digital vault, then why conduct such an exhaustive, high-profile review only to declare the exact same outcome? And far more damningly, if something new and explosive did emerge, why use the rulings of the past administrations as a convenient political shield instead of aggressively pursuing fresh justice? By desperately hiding behind the decisions of previous administrations, Patel is not defending the rule of law. He is actively preserving and reinforcing the exact same elite protection mechanism that allowed Jeffrey Epstein, his financiers, and his powerful network to operate for decades with absolute terrifying impunity. The survivors were children when their lives were shattered by billionaires and politicians. They are grown adults now, still fighting a grueling battle for the basic truth that was promised to them by men like Patel. Yet, under his watch, the FBI is not kicking down the doors of the powerful. It is quietly reinforcing the locks on the same iron gates that failed the victims a decade ago. The infamous July memo that successfully buried hundreds of gigabytes of evidence immediately after Trump's name surfaced was clearly not an administrative bureaucratic decision. It was a deeply political one. And Patel's frantic, combative performance in this hearing serves as undeniable proof that he is entirely willing to sacrifice the last remaining shred of his agency's institutional credibility to protect the political elite. When Jayapal pushed one final desperate time, Patel's answer left the room frozen in disbelief. He accused her of simply disliking his answers, claiming he had already addressed the issue. He retreated to his talking point, frantically reminding the room that he was the only FBI director to welcome new information. But when directly asked if the victims were credible or not, he pivoted wildly. He started shouting about the previous Trump administration, claiming that when victims credibly came forward back then, Trump authorized indictments. He weaponized the moment to attack Biden and Obama, claiming Trump called the entire scandal a Democratic hoax. The chamber devolved into a shouting match over expired time and yielding the floor, with a representative from New Jersey attempting to intervene, demanding to know if Patel was going to cover up the involvement of powerful men, including those who might currently be sitting on the committee. Patel threatened to start yelling as well, a stark contrast to the composed, fearless investigator he portrayed on television. This hearing exposed something infinitely larger than a single disastrous PR day for Kash Patel. It revealed in agonizing high definition a complete structural breakdown in the very institution the American people are repeatedly told exists to protect them from the predatory nature of the powerful. Across every single line of questioning, Patel consistently, deliberately chose the path of least resistance. He chose deflection. He chose inherited excuses. He leaned heavily on dense bureaucratic language designed to say absolutely everything while answering absolutely nothing. The man who built a lucrative reputation on promising radical, earth-shattering transparency has now comfortably settled into his role as the final gatekeeper, standing shoulder to shoulder with the elite to block the public from the full truth about the Epstein network. What makes this moment truly historic is not just the severity of the accusations thrown across the committee room. It is the visible, undeniable collapse of a narrative Patel himself spent years meticulously constructing. He positioned himself as the ultimate outsider, the rogue agent who would finally clean house and bring the untouchables to their knees. Yet, when faced with the ultimate real-world test, the precise moment the buried files touched the highest, most sensitive levels of political power, every bold promise he ever made instantly evaporated into the stale air of the Capitol. The refusal to give a straight, human answer regarding victim credibility, the callous unwillingness to simply sit down and meet with the survivors, and the highly suspicious decision to lock down massive amounts of digital evidence right after sensitive political names surfaced, all point to one horrifying conclusion. Institutional self-preservation won out over justice. This is fundamentally not how a functioning, healthy republic is supposed to operate. When the sitting director of the FBI cannot, or stubbornly will not, affirm the basic credibility of victims of child sex trafficking under his own direct watch, the entire national system of accountability is fatally compromised. The survivors who endured unimaginable, unspeakable horrors as vulnerable teenagers have waited long enough. They have done everything right. They have come forward out of the shadows. They have testified under oath. They have begged for basic fundamental meetings with the people sworn to protect them. And instead of answers, instead of justice, they received cheap political theater and exhausting whataboutism. That treatment is a profound betrayal. It is a betrayal not only of those brave women, but of every single American citizen who still naively believes that the rule of law should apply equally to the billionaire and the layman. Kash Patel's combative performance did not restore a single ounce of confidence in the justice system. It shattered whatever fragile illusion remained. The exact same agency that once claimed there was no credible information pointing to other powerful clients is now being led by a director who absolutely refuses to move beyond the flawed conclusions of the very administrations he once relentlessly criticized on national television. The resulting fallout sets a deeply dangerous precedent for the future of the country. The wealthiest, most politically connected names remain comfortably protected in the shadows, while the general public is condescendingly told to simply trust the bureaucratic process. The Epstein case was never just about stopping one isolated predator. It was always about exposing a vast, interconnected network that reached its insidious tentacles into the absolute highest circles of global money, elite politics, and international intelligence. By actively failing to confront this network head-on, Patel has broadcasted a clear, chilling message to every future victim and every future powerful abuser. The American justice system still bends and will always bend for the elite. The files remain largely sealed away in darkness, the survivors remain unheard, standing in the cold outside the halls of power, and the American people are left grappling with one inescapable, terrifying question. If the man placed in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation cannot deliver basic transparency and fundamental accountability on the single biggest, most horrifying scandal of our modern time, who exactly is he working for? The victims deserve so much better than this carefully choreographed political theater. The country deserves better than broken promises delivered by men hiding behind the ghosts of past administrations. The only viable path forward is unrelenting, deafening public pressure until the full, unvarnished truth is dragged kicking and screaming into the light of day. If this hearing showed you just how deep and how dark the protection of the elite truly runs, make your voice heard. Comment below with what you think the next steps must be to shatter this cover-up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure to turn on your notifications because the fight for these survivors is far from over. The truth may still be buried under layers of political maneuvering and institutional cowardice, but with enough relentless pressure, it will not stay buried forever.